Right. Good morning, everybody.
Sorry, Ed, that's it.
Yes, it's now the third day of our festival, our history festival, connecting small histories. And welcome to everybody who's joining us either for the first time or once again. It's great to see people back and joining us. I know somebody has taken vacation leave to actually come to this festival, so that's true dedication. I just want to highlight before we get into to this morning's talk some of the things that are coming up, and this evening, for which you can use your link this morning, use it again this evening. We've got two presentations starting at 6 o'clock tonight. What you find, not leaving a stone unturned. So the first presentation is reconstructing the biography of Shlomo Rebbe Perlman, and Rachel Lewis and David Perlman will be talking about that. That's part of our Connecting Small Histories project. And the second presentation is Hidden Treasures. Dawn Waterman, who you might have seen in other talks, who runs the Hidden Treasures project, is specifically talking about one aspect of that project, which is particularly, she's referring to many of the heirlooms which they have uncovered. So it's a different talk to some of the other ones that you might have seen Dawn giving. And then tomorrow we have just one session in the evening. We don't have a morning session. The evening session again starts at 6 o'clock on Thursday. Orchestras and War, Sunshine and Sussex. We're going to be hearing from the very colourful and illuminating stories around Eastbourne, its Jews and its music. And we're also going to be focusing on Shalom, Sussex, where Dr. Diane Wilkins is going to be talking about the project there, which has been highlighting Jews in the First World War in that particular area, and they've done a particular project on that. But to this morning, I'd like to introduce Aviva Dautch. We're going to be hearing about Jewish Renaissance. So let me just tell you, Jewish Renaissance was founded in October 2001, and it's a quarterly cultural magazine covering Jewish culture, arts and communities in Britain and beyond. Its editor is Rebecca Taylor, who has visited us in the past. But today we are going to be hearing from Dr. Aviva Dautch. Aviva is an award-winning British poet, academic curator and magazine publisher and executive director of Jewish Renaissance. She is well known in the Jewish community, and indeed she was at Leeds Limud, where she was on a panel which we recorded, and if you go to the JSCM podcasts you can find that recording there. And she lectures internationally on Jewish arts and culture, and from 2014 to 16 she was poet in residence at the Jewish Museum in London. She teaches Jewish culture and Holocaust studies, and she lectures at the London School of Jewish Studies. She is a trustee of the Interfaith Network, the Interfaith Youth Trust, and the Jewish Council for Racial Equality. And last year, she was appointed as Executive Director of Jewish Renaissance magazine. So welcome, Aviva. I'm going to stop sharing that splash screen, and it's over to you. If everybody would like to put themselves on speaker view, you'll get the best talk this morning. And Aviva, let's hear from you.
Well, thank you very much for that fulsome introduction. That was really lovely of you, Ed. Now I have to say, in this sense, I feel not quite a fraud, but I think for me, it's a really interesting position doing this talk. And it's kind of my first time doing a historical overview of Jewish Renaissance. So I'm really glad to do it with an audience who I feel quite connected to, and I'll explain why in a moment. But I took over at Jewish Renaissance in May last year. So I'm just under a year into the job, although my connections do go back 20 years. So today was meant to be, because we were doing the whole history of Jewish Renaissance, it was meant to be given by Rebecca Taylor. But this gives you a real insight into the world of magazine publishing. You're getting a little sneak preview. Our headline feature for our next issue, which comes out at the beginning of April and needs to go to press before Pesach, is with David Baddiel. I'm sure lots of you have been seeing, maybe some of you have read his book, Jews Don't Count, lots of you are seeing events with him. So we're doing a really in-depth interview feature article with him and a round table with him and a French rabbi, Delphine Horvier, who's written about anti-Semitism in France. And the only date we could get both of them there for an interview was at 10:30 this morning. So things change like this, but I think you'll agree it's worth it for Rebecca to be doing that interview, and instead I get the pleasure of being here. And I still feel I can talk about 20 years because my experience brackets those 20 years. I was there at the very beginning, and I'm now here as we head into our anniversary. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of how the magazine started and what it's developed into. A little bit of kind of what we do generally, but also particularly what we do with small Jewish communities in the UK. And then I'm going to take questions, and actually to help me out with those middle years, we've got our arts editor, Judy Herman, is also on the call. And I'm hoping, hiding behind my name, I've not reproduced myself twice, but there is another screen with my name on, and hiding behind there, I believe, is our chair, who is Ian Lancaster. So I think between us all, we're going to be able to give you a real in-depth view of 20 years. So this session isn't just me. But I want to start, before I share my screen and do the PowerPoint about the magazine itself, I just want to start with that moment 20 years ago, when the magazine became more than just an idea. So at that point, I just finished university, and I was very involved in Limud, as I know many of you are. And I live in South London. So what does a nice Jewish girl from Broughton Park in Manchester do when she comes to London? Go anywhere but the ghetto. So I moved to South London with friends because North London to me, I mean, I did spend some time there, but it felt very overwhelming. Whereas South London felt a little bit like a more regional Jewish community. I'd been to university in Lancaster as well. And one of the things I loved about Lancaster, and loved about some of the work I did elsewhere in the UK, I spent quite a lot of time in Bradford as well. And I can see Walter Rothschild is on the call, whose family are from Bradford. I'm sure there are other people here, but spending that time in the Lake District in Bradford with friends in Leeds, having a father who had come from Sheffield originally and lived in Liverpool, then being in the Manchester community. I like that idea of working together across the community. And suddenly in North London, it was big and overwhelming. So I came south and we connected across all the different small communities and shores, and it felt very regional to me. And I got involved in South London Limud. At that point, I was young, I was a student, and I did the youth work for the South London Daily Limud in 2001. I'd later go on and chair it. So who knows what happens the minute you volunteer for something, it just grows and grows. But 2001, there was a session led by a woman I'd never met before called Janet Levin. And it was about this idea of what was happening with arts and culture in the Jewish world. So she'd organised this session and just said, you know, if you're interested in Jewish arts and culture, come along and chat. It was one of my slots off working with the teenagers. I think, in fact, it was the only session I went to that whole day. And I loved arts and culture, and I went to this session. And there are a few things that Janet mentioned to us at that point. She talked to us about the fact that there was a new festival of arts and culture that was happening. The European Association for Jewish Culture had just been established on the continent, and they were starting this new festival for arts and culture. So she was asking kind of what did we feel about whether that was needed, whether arts and culture was something the Jewish community was lacking. She talked about this idea of confidence. How do we deal with anti-Semitism? I think these are questions that are still resonating for us. You know, is it that in the face of anti-Semitism we shrink or we hide? And I think those questions like we can pass become even more prevalent when you're in a smaller community. To what extent do you declare yourself? And she felt like, and I agreed with her, that actually the answer was not to shrink, but to take a confident place in our society. And her dream was to have a magazine that reflected that, that was communicating about our heritage and traditions, that was very diverse and open in its kind of acknowledgement of what was Jewish and who was a Jew, and that it put itself out to as diverse a Jewish audience as possible, as well as an interfaith and non-Jewish audience. So we had this brainstorming meeting and everyone got very energized. There was someone in the room who was interested in magazine publishing. He'd published airport magazines and airplane magazines and other things. And Janet became this absolute hive of activity. She reached out to all sorts of people. She reached out to Lionel Gordon, who had been chair of the Board of Deputies in the Jewish Chronicle. She reached out to Clive Lawton at Limud. But she reached out to really serious cultural figures as well, to Maureen Littman. Arnold Wesker was a really big supporter at the beginning. I remember him being around quite a lot and giving us interviews, to lots of Jewish artists. And I'll talk more about the art in a second. So she developed from the start a very, very creative vision. And we were all ready to go. I worked on the first 3 issues actually, and then I went off to do a studentship in America. But that very first issue I remember so well. We were all ready to go. We had someone doing listings, someone doing design. Janet had created the content. I was helping back up a little bit with the editing. And then 9/11 happened. So I think it was literally the week before we were about to publish. The Twin Towers came down. And it was such an interesting juxtaposition, this kind of combination of destruction and the world changing hugely. And actually, I don't know if people remember that, but there was, in the wake of it, quite an upsurge in anti-Semitism as well. And set against that was this kind of new creation and focus on Jewish culture, which was quite life-giving. And I remember kind of the questions, people going to Janet, are you sure you want to do this now? We were literally ready to go to press. And her answer was kind of, now we need it more than ever. She went for it. There were lots of doubters. People said it won't last 2 issues. But here we are almost 20 years later. And I think that vision is still kind of absolutely key to everything we do. And it's absolutely key to what I'm doing now. I think something like 80 issues later. Our circulation and readership have grown continuously. We've now got a print circulation of around 4,000. Our digital circulation, if you include our app, our social media, and we also do fortnightly newsletters, is actually the number we reach is over 12,000 additional digitally to the 4,000 print subscribers. So, and that, by the way, that 4,000 figure is both individuals but also institutions. So lots of Jewish museums, universities, Jewish departments in universities, and all sorts of other organisations have institutional subscriptions. and pre-lockdown, lots of shawls, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So we feel like we've really, really grown in terms of readership. We're also growing in ambition, and that ambition is international. We did a little bit of analysis recently, because Publishers Weekly have claimed us as one of the success stories of lockdown, because we've not just managed to cope during lockdown, but we've increased what we're doing. And I'm going to talk a bit later about lots of our Zoom events. So we've been called this success story. So I did a little bit of analysis for Publishers Weekly. They wanted kind of locations of our subscribers. Do you know, we have subscribers on every continent except for Antarctica. So we're a global magazine as well as a local magazine. And I think those two things are really important in what we do. And obviously coming up to our 20th anniversary, we're really thinking now of what is the state of the world? Where do we go next? I think the past 20 years, but particularly the last year, has been really dominated by two questions. And one is a sense of identity. Who are we? But the other is this sense of space. How do we exist in small and large spaces, on the web virtually, and located, firmly rooted in very real spaces? And those are things that I want to think about further. And I'm going to open up to you in a little while, not just for questions, but for contributions, because I'd love for you to help me think further about what our next 20 years should look like, that kind of 2020 vision. But I'm just going to share my screen, and for kind of the next 15 minutes or so, take you through a few issues and a few different things of what we do. So I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint. Let me just, okay. So in fact, can everyone see? Has everyone got a good sight of the screen? Brilliant. So I'm starting here with our first three issues. And I wanted them not just to do a little bit of reminiscence for myself, but also to show you, even though they are slightly dated now and our look now is quite different, I still thought, I went back and got these covers for today, and I thought, gosh, how beautiful they are, and how invested Janet was in the magazine's form echoing its content and really being a work of art and inspiring works of art. And I think the credit for that has to go not just to Janet, but to the very first designer, Irene Wise. And I want you to particularly look at the third issue, Spring 2002, which I'm looking at, because there are a couple of really interesting things about this issue. One is we did a feature on the golem in it. And I had quite a moment the other day of shivers, because this was the last issue I worked on and the last feature I worked on. The golem was because Julia Pascal had a new play out about that story. Well, our current issue, the one that's out at the moment, the focus is Prague. We've got all sorts of things about the golem in there, but we also just covered a new memoir of a disabled Jewish artist named Riva Lera called Golem Girl. It's been one of the sensations in America and has just come over to the UK and been printed by Virago. It's actually a very, very wonderful book. Who did we have interview her? Julia Pascal. So I just think it's really interesting, and I didn't set that up, Rebecca did. But although we're always looking for the new and what is hot now, and we were introducing a new author, Riva, to our community, alongside her we had someone chairing it who's been invested in Jewish culture for over 20 years. And I think that combination of the cutting edge, but also really acknowledging our history and roots and helping Jewish creatives develop is part of our mission. I also thought it was interesting because we created our own new work of art for the cover. So this was a piece we commissioned specially. It was actually, I remember seeing the whole thing, it was a collage, which was probably about half the size of my room, which Irene then photographed and made into a digital image. But I kind of love that idea of commissioning artwork and the idea that the magazine itself is a work of art. If I move on, so we have different sections in the magazine. Every issue we have what's called a passport section where we travel somewhere. Usually about 3 in a year of the past, 2 to 3 of the passport focuses are on international areas, but at least once and sometimes twice a year, that passport is to a UK Jewish community. So for now, I'm showing you this one, which is international. I'm going to show you a few UK ones in a moment. This one is, I thought this was really interesting because this was East Africa. It was one of the first ones that Rebecca edited. And it's really, so that is part of a whole series of articles about East Africa and Uganda. That was our focus. But this particular article looks at the history of the Uganda plan and how and why we didn't all end up in Uganda, but instead the state of Israel was created. And looking at people like the early Zionists, such as Israel Zangwill, and how they developed this focus on East Africa and why. So kind of we look historically, but of course the rest of the passport looked at what is the Jewish community in Africa now as well. So it's always got that historical, but that cutting edge idea. One of our other sections is called Sephardi Renaissance. A very early supporter of Janet's was Naim Dangor, and his son David Dangor has continued that support. And what Naim wanted was that this idea that the Jewish voice was not just an Ashkenazi Jewish voice. He felt like that although there were other publications in the UK, very few really took account of the Sephardi and Mizrahi communities. And we looked, I mean, Janet had lots of discussions with Naim at the beginning about this idea of not just, we weren't just including them because Naim wanted us to, but there has been a massive Sephardi Renaissance and that has been going on for years. So we have a section where we work with Sephardi voices and we have a Sephardi Renaissance section as well. We also work with all sorts of other voices. As I said, we really do want to be as diverse as possible. We have a very thorough listing section. This is our what's happening from when it was real and pre-lockdown, although we still do a what's happening at the moment with everything going on virtually. And I really hope as we begin to emerge, we will be doing listings for what's happening in person as well. So it's always a good source of information. This particular one is open to pages on events in London, but we also always cover events across the rest of the UK Jewish communities as well. And at the moment, I'll mention a little bit about what we've done in lockdown, but we have not just print listings, but we have virtual listings, we have online listings, which we call home entertainment. So if you're not sure what Zoom to do next, you can always have a look there. This is my innovation, something that we've just started in the last issue, which is a new occasional series of longer pieces called The Long Read. We have to get them sponsored, but we're hoping to use this for those occasional times where it's really good to have an in-depth article and print something that's not been done before. So for example, this is a previously unpublished short story by Nobel laureate Isaac Bashevis Singer, which was translated by Yiddish, given to us by the Isaac Bashevis Singer Trust. And we also did a Zoom alongside it, which was supported by the trust, but also members of Bashevis Singer's family. And I'm currently, here's another secret, I'm currently working on another project uncovering some previous archive material that's never been seen before that we're hoping will go in next January. And in between, we're saving the long reads for if there is someone who wants to do a real in-depth piece of essay or piece of research or cover something. So, for example, our next one, we're hoping the author Gabriel Joseph Pavici, who many of you might know from Sussex, he's just about to publish a memoir about his experiences in COVID and his family history. He's an immigrant, and we are hoping to get some of the unpublished extracts before that goes live to the rest of the world. We do things as well as have a magazine readership. So we do tours. These are the tours that were meant to happen in 2020 had COVID not intervened. We're hoping some of them will be rescheduled 2022-23. Certainly we already had lots of interest in rescheduling Georgia, which you can see here for 2022. But in the meantime, as the UK begins to open up, we've decided to start back with some UK-based ones. So in our next issue of the magazine coming out in 3 weeks' time, you'll see adverts for an exploration of Jewish country houses, and also our big trip, which, all being well, will be next October, is going to be to the Isle of Man to celebrate 80 years, mark 80 years of the anniversary of Nazi internment of Jewish refugees on the Isle of Man. We're working with Insiders Outsiders, the Association of Jewish Refugees. We're going to have a new blue plaque put up. We're going to have music performances of music written in the Isle of Man. We've got local Isle of Man historians and curators who are going to give tours of the camps. We've got the former director of the Association of Jewish Refugees, the historian Anthony Grenville, who is going to be one of our guides, along with Monica Bohm-Duchan, who is the director of Insiders Outsiders. So we're really hoping that going local, as you all know, doesn't mean not also being incredibly interesting and discovering new territory. We do a few other things. This is last year's Young Journalist Prize, which is going to be running again next year. If you know any budding, and I'm changing the word young to emerging, people who want to be, I don't think it's about age, people who want to emerge as Jewish journalists, particularly arts journalists, will be launching that again next year. If you live in the UK and you're an emerging journalist, you qualify. This is the home entertainment I was talking about with our website, our recommendations to keep you entertained while stuck indoors. You will see we launched this March the 15th. We launched this in March 2020. As of March the 15th, 2021, it was still growing. We divide what's happening around the UK into all sorts of themes. Listings come into us from all sorts of communities. So please send us your events as well. We will happily advertise them for you and publicise them in our online newsletter. These are, I'm going to do a very quick flick through. These are some of our Jewish small community regional coverage articles. And I'm showing you these because one of the things I'd love to happen in the Q&A session is for you to pitch to me. Would you like your local area to be covered? Do you know things that are happening that we should be thinking about reporting on? So this is when we did Jewish life in Cambridge. And you can see this particular double page spread is where we interviewed all sorts of different people at Cambridge. We also had articles on the history of Jewish Cambridge. We had a feature on poet Elaine Feinstein and her time at Cambridge as a Jewish woman. So that was Cambridge. This is Brighton. You can see it's called Brighton Beach Memoirs, when we explored Brighton. This is one of my favourites because although I grew up in the north, I grew up in Manchester, I'd never been to Sheffield, and I feel really ashamed about that because that's where my dad grew up. And this was the focus we did. We did about 8 pages on the north of England, a couple of issues again. And this is our Sheffield coverage. So you can see, you saw with Cambridge, the page I showed you was our interviews with people who are in Cambridge now. For the Northern England, I'm just showing you an article more historically, and we cover both, about looking at where the Steel City Jews came from in the 19th and 20th century. And another article that went alongside that, parallel in our Northern England section, was about Calgarth, about the archaeological dig at the former Calgarth estate in the Lake District, which I'm sure many of you know about, which is uncovering information about how, I think it was about 300 young Jewish Holocaust survivors were transported there. And my favourite thing about the whole article was we actually managed to get a photograph of a little plastic unicorn. And it was actually the finding of this plastic toy during an excavation that made them realise it was the site of the school. This unicorn belonged to one of the refugees who was transported, and it was the very first thing they found. So we're looking at interesting projects as well. Just to show, these are our last 3 issues. So this was my very first one. This was July 2020, my first in charge. And you can see the international focus, but also we looked at Rosalind Franklin. It was her centenary, the founder of DNA, and her sister wrote an article about it for us. And we did a big launch. We do quarterly magazine launches. And for that launch, we got together Rosalind Franklin's family members, the actress Juliet Stevenson, who'd been the first person to play Rosalind Franklin on screen, and Rivka Isaacson, who is the young Jewish woman who now holds Rosalind Franklin's research position at King's. And she is the first Jewish woman since Rosalind Franklin to hold that scientific position at King's. So our events, we do lots and lots of online events around our magazine where we try and bring those features to life. Washington, DC, we did pre the election. We brought together all sorts of Jewish Washingtonians, and our current issue on Prague. If you're interested, the 21st of March, we have the director of the Prague Jewish Museum, writers and artists from Prague, and my favourite novelist Shalom Auslander, who wrote an article for us called Why Kafka Killed His iPhone. And he's going to talk about how he was inspired by Kafka. That was the issue that's just been published. Our next issue, which you've got to subscribe to be able to get hold of a copy of, our next issue, the passport feature, is on Ireland. And I can see Ruti Lax is on the Zoom. She's one of the people who's been working with Rebecca to help create those articles and look at what we should be covering. But also, again, this is a little secret tip that's not been publicised yet. We're going to do a special launch event around our Irish issue. When we cover an area, we always do an online Zoom also exploring it. So we're going to do that on Bloomsday. We'll have a little bit of think about why James Joyce chose a Jewish character, Leopold Bloom, through which to see Dublin, but we'll also have a look at what's going on in Ireland now and have some music and other things. So that's a little bit for next issue. I'm going to stop my share because I've talked quite a lot, and I wanted to leave us with half an hour for either you to ask me, or Ian and Judy might join me as well, questions, but to throw in ideas. Do you have stories you think we should cover? Do you have areas of the UK where you think the Jewish community story there needs to be heard more and we could include in our passport or do a feature article on? Please share your ideas.
Well, thank you, Aviva. There's been some comments in the chat whilst you've been talking, comments about the idea that Jews are maybe not as focused on art and culture as they used to be. So that's one. There's been a little bit of a debate going on in the chat there, and Howard Saffer says, "Come to Sheffield anytime; he'll show you around."
Brilliant. I'll definitely take you up on that post-lockdown. I'd love to.
But maybe we'll go to gallery view, and then if people want to ask questions, let me just get rid of the chat there. If you'd like to hold your hand up, and then we can just ask you to unmute if you've got a question. I can't actually, people are spread across different screens. So I think, is that Marilyn Arbisman? Yes, do you want to unmute and ask?
Right.
There we go.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. I've been getting the magazine since day one. I don't remember there being anything about the Romaniot Jews, and I'm really fascinated by them. Have done quite a bit of research myself, and was even more interested when I went along to the JR trip to Greece a few years ago. Have we ever done anything about that, Aviva? Or if not, can we?
Okay, well, certainly the answer is we can, because we've not done it in a recent issue, and we can always revisit things. So I'm going to ask you to pop that in the chat, and I'll ask Ed for a transcript of the chat when I go away here, so I make sure all the ideas are taken with us. I don't want to lose anything. But there's a few people actually I want to ask to speak to that, because I can see on the call is David Clark, who was there at the very beginning. He was actually the person who drove me to my first Jewish Renaissance meeting at Janet's house. I remember that very well. But also Ian, who's our chair, and Judy, who's our arts editor. Do chip in if you know any more about that. David, would you like to unmute?
Yes, good. I don't think we've done anything specifically on the Romaniot community in Greece, but we have done a feature on the synagogue in Crete, which was renovated and reopened in 1999. And I'm still a member of that synagogue. But we haven't done anything specifically on the Romaniot, I think.
Okay.
Brilliant idea. Thank you. I will definitely.
Aviva, I'm not very good at actually trying to write this down.
Okay. Okay. Can I ask a favour? Will someone pop it in the chat on behalf of Marion? Just put Romaniot. It's just for me to make sure I get all the ideas collated that I can take away with me.
Yeah, I think Tony will perhaps do that. Janet, you've got your hand raised, although you've not got your camera on. But maybe you can still ask your question if you unmute. Janet Naim. No,
hi, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. Yes, I was, Aviva, I wanted to ask you, I was interested, you're going to do some country house tours in the UK. I'm in Tunbridge Wells, and I was going to ask you if you're covering Salomons. And we also, as Ian probably knows, we have wonderful 12 Chagall windows in a nearby village to Tunbridge Wells as well.
So funnily enough, I led a tour to Salomons and to the Chagall windows about 10 years ago with the North London community. We've not put it on this one because we're going to do just a 2 or 3 day as a trial. So the first one we're going to try out, we're advertising now for mid-July. So again, the dates will go out with our April issue. We're looking at just doing one overnight, the 20th, 21st of July. And we're going to specifically look at more of the Rothschild connected ones. But if it works, we would then love to do a few other day trips and local tours. And I have to say Salomons and the Chagall windows would definitely be on my list because I loved it. And it was a nice one you could do in a day.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've led several tours for Jewish charity groups over the years, you know, for about 50 people at a time. And it's very easy to do with a pub lunch in the middle. It's very easy to do in a day. And if you need any help, I'd be happy to do that. I usually do a lecture in both places as well.
Will you put the note in the chat and I'll come to you. And just for everyone else, I'm assuming you're so Salomon's the first Jewish Lord Mayor of London, wasn't he?
That's right, he was.
One of the first, I think he was the second Jewish MP.
Yeah, he was in fact the first one before Rothschilds, but he wouldn't take the oath, and so he was chucked out. But he actually did sit on the benches, and they have a bench, as you probably know when you went to Salomon's, the bench is there in the little museum.
The thing that I remember most, I mean, I absolutely really enjoyed it. The thing I remember most though was it felt very un-Jewish, was his obsession with hot air ballooning.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Wasn't he obsessed with hot air balloons?
His nephew, who took the title, because the original one was not was childless. Sorry. His nephew was a Renaissance man. He was a scientist. He had his own science theatre, and he brought electricity to Tunbridge Wells. And he also had the first motor show in the country, which he put on in Tunbridge Wells. So he was quite something. He was very, very interested in photography as well, and did a lot of his scientific experiments in the science theatre, which is still there today.
Fabulous. Well, if we get interest in people have to register their interest, but if people say they're interested in country houses tours, definitely on the list.
Great.
And I think it's really interesting because I'm seeing lots of other people kind of mentioning places and people, and I just want to address a couple. I'm scanning the chat. I've not got huge amounts of ability to focus across, but I did notice someone mentioned St Anne's and the Sephardi connection there. So kind of St Anne's, you know, childhood beach trips, but also, again, particularly if something has I had no idea there was a Sephardi connection to St Anne's. That sounds fascinating.
Well, Aviva, I'm going to draw your attention because I'm doing a talk for AJR, and I'm going to do it for the Abraham Society, JW3. But Hilary has been doing research into St Anne's, and we heard from her on Monday night. So that makes up a major part of the research that we've done in our small Connecting Small Histories project. So we've got a lot of research into that.
Fabulous. Well, one of the things we're so happy about, I mean, Ed, Rebecca and I met, didn't we, just after I took over? One of the things that's really on my agenda, and I know Ian's too, Ian has been talking about it since I started, probably beforehand, about this idea of having a much wider reach. So many of the Jewish publications are London focused. We really want to have that wide reach across the whole of the UK. So this is important to us, and we're really happy. So if you don't want to feed stuff to me directly, do feed it through Ad. We are keeping an eye on everything that the network is doing, and we would love to build a relationship with you.
And indeed, we've still got the two sections. I think they're still live from our reading month last year that you took part in, and we've got the small communities sections from JR in there, which are on the website, and you can download. I'll help you through the chat. First of all, compliment from Gerald, who compliments you on the great graphics of JR. And tell you a secret, our current designer is the moonlighting designer of National Geographic magazine.
Hasn't she done a beautiful job?
Can we steal her as well? And Ruth Badley, who was one of our speakers yesterday, says, how about a feature on contributors such as actors, directors, designers to regional theatres? And she's suggesting Harrogate. It's a beautiful Frank Mitcham theatre.
Yeah. Well, our arts editor, Judy Herman, is on that line, in the line, as she is absolutely the person who leads for us on theatre. So I don't know if you want to say anything, Judy, or tell people how to contact you, if you unmute.
Hi. Thank you, Aviva, that was so wonderful. And completely irrelevant, but your ring has fascinated me. So everybody watching, very important, all stuck at home, that we do wonderful, colourful things like have scarves and rings. I'm sure we all know that. And I also just want to say that compliment on the graphics. We have really careful about. We have wonderful photographers. We have an illustrator called Thomas Fournier. If you look at the who does wonderful, clever illustrations. And I'm very proud to work for the magazine just because it's so beautiful. I mean, I love the online presence, and if we didn't have that, I think that would be terrible. But it's that thing when you hold the magazine, you're so proud of it, and people who are contributors. The last issue, every single person on that cover contacted us to rave, not about the fact that just that they were cover stars, which of course they were very pleased to be, but that they loved the magazine so much and what it said about Prague. So that, honestly, I'm not being partisan. I just, that's how I feel. And thank you, whoever said they've just gotten and ordered a subscription just on the basis of what Aviva said. Yeah, we do try to get out of London. I do. I mean, my current preoccupation is that regional theatres need to get together to share productions. So, and Harrogate's possibly one I've missed somewhere along the way. Frank Matcham Theatres I adore, I've been to lots of those. But thank you so much for that suggestion. I think the idea, your idea of looking at, you know, the different members of the team, particularly after they've all suffered so much during lockdown, I think that would be really life affirming. I mean, we could look at it historically, but obviously we should be looking at it, how to go forward, how to reinvigorate the industry, because, you know, it's been absolutely heartbreaking, you know, to watch people and to listen to people whose wonderful careers have been left in ruins for the moment. But we will pick up and we will look at it, but we can look at that in depth, we can look at it historically, and we can look at it for the future and going forward from the pandemic. And I think it's a brilliant idea, and I do thank you very, very much, Ruth, for that. And I hope Aviva agrees that we should be looking into it.
I completely agree. As I said, Judy is the person, but for now, again, pop it on the chat and I'll pass any contact information over to her, and then she can be in touch as our arts editor and theatre expert.
And I think Ian Lancaster wants to chip in. Do you want to unmute yourself, Ian?
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to say, as chairman for the last, I don't know how many years of Jewish Renaissance, again, thanks to Aviva, and actually, Judy, thank you to you for saying what I otherwise would have said, so I won't repeat it. I just wanted to mention a point. This is a little promo for me, actually, and Northwest Surrey Synagogue, because apropos the point about Jewish contribution to regional theatre, I'm doing a session for adult education at Northwest Surrey Synagogue on April the 21st, titled From Corda to Gavron, Jews and British Cinema. So, and that will be an open session if anyone would like to join, Jews and British Cinema, April 21st. But I think the idea of doing something on regional theatre is great. I'm just trying to remember whether Peter Morrow was Jewish or not. I don't know the answer to that, but worth looking at that as well. And I talk as someone who is absolutely and totally committed to regional theatre, having in a previous career been the drama and dance officer at East Midlands Arts Association, but that was many moons ago. I just wanted to add to what Aviva was saying about JR as such. I do think that one of the most fascinating sections we have is the passport, and we always get very positive response. It's fascinating to see the range of contributions, contributors, interviewees in each place that we go to, that we cover. And it's fascinating to see what the articles, the passport articles, prompt in terms of follow-up correspondence. And there's all sorts of nuggets of information about Jewish communities around the UK, and of course, much further afield that we've covered. And I'll just give a little trailer. With the Olympics coming up, our passport in the summer will be Tokyo, which should be really interesting. I've been to Tokyo several times. I never realized there was a sort of strong Jewish community there. But so, I mean, really, all I want to do is encourage, support, and thank Aviva, and encourage you all to take a subscription. And I will add that I'm a small communities maven myself, having been bar mitzvahed at Chatham Shul.
Yeah, it's an amazing looking shul. Howard has mentioned that he uses the passport section, especially when he was visiting Cuba. And so JR does go far and wide, but there's quite a lot of suggestions. I can't read them all out. People can look at them themselves in the chat, and we'll refer to them and pass them on to Aviva at the end of the session. I want to just bring in Anne Goldstein, because she's been doing our research on Eastbourne, and she's really opened up a lot of avenues there. So Anne, do you want to sort of comment? She's having problems with her. Oh no, there we go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I just think the whole area of Jews and music hall is very exciting, and Vivi Lax has done some research on that. Her sister has reminded me, but there was some very interesting characters, many Sephardi Jews as well who were involved. There was the whole Bagani troupe, which had family connections with Peter Sellers and a whole sort of dynasty of Jews. There was an incredible cellist, August Van Biener, who he did the same act 6,000 times around UK and abroad, called The Broken Melody, and he has a fascinating story. So I just think it's very much unknown to the Jewish community, I think, the role of Jewish music hall performers.
Absolutely. And I love music. I mean, we want culture to be as diverse as possible. And since I'm giving plugs to people, our listings editor, Danielle Goldstein, is also a music editor. She's rather wonderful, and she's quite young, but she really has this eye out for not just contemporary music, but music across kind of the historical period. I mean, music hall's not actually very old, and I love music hall too, but and one of the other things is we work quite closely with JMI, the Jewish Music Institute. So hilariously, I can see that Joe is holding up the last issue, because if you look at our back page, it's advertising the Jewish Music Institute's World Music Tour. So if you people do have music ideas, if Danielle can't work with you to do the research, it's always something we're happy to reach out to the JMI with. And or we sometimes do joint events with them, joint online events. So we did recently, I don't know if anyone's interested, but in Italian Renaissance Jewish music. So we obviously co-hosted that as Jewish Renaissance. But I mean, I'd love to deep dive into music hall. And funny enough, I don't know Richie as well, but I know Vivi from London, and Vivi and I did our PhDs at Royal Holloway at the same time. So I do know about her research, and I've even seen her perform klezmer herself. So
Me too, yes.
I know there's not a huge amount of time, so I was just trying to flick through the chat and see if there's anything I really should cover and mention. So I'll do that and then pass back to Ed for last questions. But I did notice someone mentioned in the chat this idea of orthodoxy, and when we're diverse, you know, how diverse cross-communally, but also and someone else was asking about kind of, do we cover rabbinic disputes, as it were? So there's quite a lot packed into that. I would say we do try to be as broad as possible. We really, for us, we are cross-communal. That's how we see it. And we see Jewish as an open identity. We have done, I mean, right now, Rebecca is interviewing with David Baddiel, a woman rabbi. But on the other hand, we did a couple of issues ago, we did a photo essay about Haredi Jews in Brooklyn during COVID. And we've also covered what's been happening in Stamford Hill. From the inside, it's a little bit harder, but we do, I mean, there's the outside depiction of Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jews, which is what was being asked about in the chat. You know, things like Shtisel, we've definitely done coverage of those kinds of programs of TV and film about Orthodox Jews, but there's also been coverage, and this was when I was just a reader, not involved, but I remember reading an article in Jewish Renaissance about the Israeli Orthodox film school and how they were making Israeli Orthodox film projects. So it's not there ideally, but we do try and reach out across. Whether they read our magazine is a whole other issue, but why not? Okay, Ed, would you like to take us on and finish it?
Well, Judy just wants to reply to Anne on Eastbourne and the musicians.
You need to
unmute yourself, Judy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, bizarrely, when I did my degree in performing arts a very long time ago at Middlesex University, music hall was my special study. But I wasn't at that time, you know, thinking Jewishly about them. And I love music hall. I really do. And I presume we're talking musical performers in music hall, but you know, they could just be people who, and it's not all music, obviously, there's dance involved, there's all sorts of things. And I think that's a brilliant idea. So Anne, I just wanted to ask, perhaps I could get together with you and consult with you about that, because I think that would be absolutely amazing article to do. And I do know Vivi as well, so she's definitely on that one.
Yeah, we put the two of you together, yes.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind putting me together with a couple of your lovely people there, and the lady who asked the other question as well, who seemed to, yeah, I would really be very helpful. Lady in Harrogate too, please.
Well, of course, if you get the chance, please do tune in tomorrow, because Anne is going to be giving her talk then. Oh, right. And she always comes up with fascinating things. Anne is one of our great contributors to JSCN, not just to the Small Communities, Connecting Small Histories project, but also to the whole of JSCN. So her resources are infinite, I would say. And indeed, so there's been a number of things which Aviva has popped up there already, answering in the chat, and indeed there's so much there. I'm going to ask if anybody's got a pressing question, if they actually want to raise their digital hand or their physical hand. That would be very, whoops, I'm just flicking screens. So if you did put your hand up, then if you just want to put it back up, no. But so if you've got any, Gillian Moomin is saying, referring to the Samuelsons in Southport, who were one of the early opened one of the early cinemas as well, and which is an interesting combination of cinema owners and a tobacconist. So all rolled into one in the Samuelsons in Southport. And of course, John Cowell has written a very large tome on the history of Southport, which includes reference to that as well. And John is going to be speaking next week. So let me hand back to Aviva for any closing comments.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, because the great thing, and you can already see what's just happened in an hour, in fact, half an hour of questions really, but a magazine like Jewish Renaissance doesn't stand on its own. It's not an organisation where it's top heavy, as it were. It only works as a magazine when people come to us with content and we reach out, and it is that partnership. So I'm really, really glad that we've suddenly got another 40 people who can feed us stories. We can't promise to cover everything, or we are quarterly as well, so to cover everything at certain times, but we will definitely try, and we are really, really open. So if people do want to feed us material, please be in touch. Ed has mine and Rebecca's email addresses. I will say also, on the other side, as we get back to real life, I very much want to be travelling outside of London and doing Jewish Renaissance events, not just in London. So if your community could be interested in hosting us, if you know someone locally who might be interested in being an ambassador for the magazine, or even a trustee, I mean, those are quite heavy voluntary roles, but we are looking for people who want to be involved. So please do be in touch. And maybe should I hand over to Ian to say a thank you in the last word, as our chair and as the person who's really been there for many more of the 20 years than I have.
Ian, do you want to unmute? This is the big challenge of the 21st century.
It's okay.
Joy, I have never been able to mute a classroom of Jews in my life, and now I can push the button.
Technology, at least we have to be able to laugh at it, don't we? We have to be able to take every silver lining that we can at the moment. Aviva, that was fantastic, thank you. But more particularly, thank you, Ed, thank you everyone for coming on this. It's fascinating to me that there is now a small communities network. As I said, I was bar mitzvah at Chatham, brought up in the Medway towns, so I am a small community person. And I just think it's great that at last the work that Malcolm Weissman, who is still doing, for God's sake, so much to help the small communities, and it's getting this kind of harvest, this kind of spin-off, and it's great. But thank you, Ed, thank you everyone, thank you Small Communities Network for initiating a Small Communities Arts Festival and for inviting Jewish Renaissance to participate in it. I'm glad to see from the comments that you think it's been interesting, and look forward to seeing you more of you on our subscribers list. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ian. Thank you, Aviva and Judy, and thank you to everybody for coming in and taking part and being a very, very active chat, and all those contacts, of course, we will try and pull them together. We're saving the chat as we do everything. And you'll be able to watch this recording after Pesach as well, when we put all the recordings up. I'll finish this morning as we end just by sharing the screen about tonight's presentation. And there we go, 6 o'clock tonight. Use the same link that you used this morning, and 2 fantastic presentations there. Like I say, a novel presentation from Dawn Waterman of Hidden Treasures, and revealing something different to any of the other talks that you've seen from her before. And Rachel Lewis and David Perlman. And Rachel has been doing a huge amount of research into Sunderland and the Sunderland diaspora. Sunderland doesn't exist as a Jewish community anymore. When we were unlocked briefly, I was able to go and visit at least the outside of the synagogue last year. And we'll see what happens to that. One of our partners, Foundation for Jewish Heritage, is working on that particular project. Again, tomorrow night, Thursday night, go to our page on the JSCN website, jscn.org.uk/history festival, and you will see the rest of the program and the details of tomorrow and next Monday. And we have next Wednesday and Tuesday and Wednesday again, a morning and an evening session both day, with the finale being on Thursday. And thank you all so much for coming this morning. We wish you well for the rest of the day. Hope to see you back tonight.